Good afternoon, everybody. What a beautiful afternoon here in San Francisco. It's guys, it's sunny outside. You're in the kind of mood that you want to learn. And today, I think we are extraordinarily blessed at SF Big to share the next bit of time with you. We're partnering with our friends at MiQ to talk about this education series, and I think we're really going to kick off well with probably one of the most fascinating topics right now, I think, in 2021, and that is the relationships and how to grow and do business in China. It's something that everyone is fascinated with, they're intrigued with. The apprehension is what they don't know is what they don't know. And so we have an opportunity today to learn. And I believe that's very exciting. I want to thank all of you for taking your time this afternoon to start with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Joe, welcome. Thank you very much for starting this today and getting us going and really taking us off on a learning time.
Thank you, John. Thanks for that introduction, and hey to everyone there. Really appreciate the time today. I think the last time we spoke with SF Big and the community was in October last year. So I'm hoping everyone's keeping well and staying safe and enjoying things slowly to becoming a little bit more open and back to normal. First, I'd just like to say thank you to a few people. The team at SF Big have just been phenomenal. So John, yourself, Zach, Aidan in helping organize today, and also to Emily from our marketing team on helping build this content out. So you're going to hear very little from me. I've got a few updates to give you, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Brian Eccleston, who's our VP of National Sales for China, who'll be leading the session today. Just some house rules. If you've got any questions throughout, please feel free to throw them in the chat bar. We'll either address those throughout the session or we may hold off to the end. And hopefully we have 10 or 15 minutes to do a bit of a Q&A. So for those that don't know me, my name's Joe Worswick and I'm the Regional Vice President for MiQ on the West Coast. And as John mentioned, very excited today to officially announce our big, bold partnership with SF Big for 2021. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, what does this mean to us? Well, the vision of this partnership is all about learning and education. So our goal is to co-curate content and educational sessions on all the top topics that impact our industry the most. So these range from topics like we're discussing today on the growth experienced in China and how marketers can capitalize on that. We're going to continue to have an evolving conversation around the topic of cookieless and identity. We're bringing in different partners to be able to speak with us on that topic. And there'll be other topics such as kind of the evolving space of CTV and out of home that we'll touch on throughout the year. Another thing to announce is if you go on the SF Big website, I believe in about a week's time, you'll be able to access a list of all the talk tracks that we've created under this MiQ Unlocked brand. And within that session of the website, you'll be able to book bespoke sessions to be held at your businesses or with your teams, where we'll come in and talk about these topics on more of a one-to-one basis. Or alternatively, you can continue to join these quarterly events that we'll be hosting with SF Big. So that's my shameless plug over. The second thing I want to talk about is a really exciting event that's happening next week. I believe it's exactly this time next week. And that is the Best of the West event, which was a huge success last year. So just as a reminder, that'll be on May the 12th, kicking off at 1:30 p.m. again. And the speaker list looks fantastic. And we have representation for all up and down the West Coast. So if you haven't checked it out, please check it out and be sure to sign up. So that's it from me, all my updates. I'm going to hand over to Brian in a second. As John said, this topic on China has gathered a lot of attention, and for our business, especially over the last 6 months, we've had a lot of clients lean in and ask about how they can capitalize on this. We've actually been on a 3-year journey in prepping our business to tackle this market and really capitalize on it. And we've learned a lot. You know, we've made mistakes, but we've also learned how to do it right. I think Brian's going to really walk you through all of these learnings and how you as brands and marketeers can really capitalize on it. So I'm going to pass you over to Brian now to kick off the session.
Thank you, Joe and John. And just bear with me a moment. We'll get the screen share going. Does that come through okay for everyone? Joe? A verbal thumbs up?
Yeah, we can see it all.
Okay, great. Just making sure. So again, thank you, Joe and John, for the kind introduction. Thank you, everyone, for your time and participation today. We want this to be a valuable session and something that you walk away feeling that you've learned from and potentially have some additional questions to ask. So just know that coming from this session, we will share the deck around. You'll see it. It's a little bit text heavy, but that's for purpose. It's something that if you have in the future to reference, it might be nice to have on hand. Of course, Joe leads up our West Coast team, so he's always on hand to help. And then myself, I oversee the North American efforts for our sales team for China. So between the two of us and the full team, you'll be supported. Any questions you need to have answered, we're more than happy to answer them. And so, Joe mentioned MiQ being a leading programmatic partner. And really, when you consider the approach that we've taken in China, it's one very much where our domain expertise within being programmatic experts is one where we wanted to be able to apply that lens of expertise with all the international platforms and partners that we work with within China, which obviously, working with local Chinese tech partners and platforms is incredibly important, because it's something, if you're looking to have better connected marketing and platforms aren't speaking to each other or strategies are siloed, you're going to run into issues. So very much within the genesis and our DNA of being a leading programmatic media partner, the idea of doing that in China with that Western lens of expertise applied to the Eastern technology stacks and partnerships, that's something where we really feel it's unique and different. And we'll obviously take you through a little bit today around some of the learnings, some of the best practices, just to help you feel more familiar with that market and something that you can begin to start exploring for yourself if you're not already doing so. So one thing to consider when you look at who you would want to work with as you sort of expand or consider China for your business is, are the partners you're working with there and around the world truly global? And I think that's something for MiQ and having the presence in Shanghai and being such an international and global business. The idea of having connected marketing where you can start to have best practices that overlap between regions, or things that are communicating with each other, different use of creative, all kinds of things that you're going to definitely want a global partner with expertise around the world. So that's one thing that we've definitely seen where partners can fall down, is when you start to get into the scope of real global access and expertise. China tends to be a spot where you're going to see maybe fewer options and partners that are maybe less familiar or less advanced with their expertise in that region. So you can see we're all over the world. And I would say, as advice to, as you start to evaluate partners to work with in China, really consider that true global footprint and how much that partner will be able to service you locally in that market, but also potentially from home if you're in San Francisco or Seattle or in Vancouver. So a quick thing to call out on the agenda. We're going to first take a look at the introduction to the Chinese market. Within this, start to understand what is some of the size of the market, some of the stats, some things that will just ultimately, as marketers, get us excited, recognizing that there's a huge opportunity to be had, and something that obviously is very different, but with the right strategy and approach, you can be very effective as a digital marketer. Uncovering some of the opportunity with programmatic. So obviously that's really our specialty, is as a programmatic partner. And so we'll walk through some of the major players, some of the best practices and tips, and just some things to keep in mind as far as learnings as you start to leverage programmatic expertise to reach Chinese audiences. And then again, just some top tips. And this will range everything from how to deploy targeting all the way through to creative best practices. And it gets a little bit tactical, but hence the somewhat text heavy ending to the presentation. That way you have it on hand as reference, or you can use it in the future if you need to look back at this. So a few things to kick us off, which will hopefully get everyone excited. Everyone knows, P&G was recently crowned Marketer of the Year. This first quote comes from Mark Pritchard, and it starts by saying, "If you want to see the future of marketing, look to China." And I remember reading this and just, feeling so excited that this was being, recognized as something that was, as a market, very cutting edge and very forward thinking. And there's a lot of places where this comes into play. If you consider identity and privacy, and some of the things we've seen done with CAID, which is just the basically a Chinese IDFA workaround. And so there's a lot of things that are happening in China, which are almost lead indicators for some of the things that marketers around the world are going to be approaching with different strategies within their local regions. And I think privacy, targeting, everything to do with sort of what is different in China, but is obviously more widely applicable when you look to some of the other challenges we're facing around the world. China is definitely one of those markets where if you want to see where things are going, it's absolutely forward thinking, and it's very it's on the cutting edge. I think that quote goes on to say, China is where transformation is happening. The market flipped a few years ago from the old brand building digital model, or old brand building model, to a digital ecosystem, from brick and mortar to e-commerce. And I think we've all seen that throughout this past year accelerate to the point where brands that are making that digital transformation, that are very savvy within their e-commerce and digital approach, are really winning. And that's very much sort of been the norm for China for years. The next point, programmatic advertising is in a strong position to withstand downturns. This speaks to the nature of programmatic's efficiency. And so I think throughout this past year, there was obviously massive shifts with budgets, maybe big branding investments that were pulled, but advertisers, marketers, they really started to look at, where can I gain that efficiency? Where can I find that performance that's going to help drive sales or bookings or things that are material to the ultimate business outcomes that I care about for my company? And so this is one where programmatic and that efficiency, it's really accelerated in this past year, because it's been something where marketers have been able to find those results. And that just becomes increasingly more important during downturns, when everyone's sort of forced to do more with less, or at least the equal amount with less. And then advertising conversations in China should start and end with the word mobile. And this is something we'll get into a bit more, but it's very much a mobile first environment. And that's something you want to keep in mind as far as the KPIs that you'll be measuring, how you're leveraging SDKs for the purpose of tracking and measurement and reporting, what you're doing with your creative, all the sorts of things that you want to consider when you start to think about a mobile first approach, as opposed to what might exist in other regions where you're heavily focused, where maybe mobile isn't as much of the majority as it is in China. So for an introduction to the Chinese market, again, we'll take you through some of the top line stats and really just dive into why is this audience so important for many international marketers. And so China, by the numbers, first thing to consider is the population size. So roughly, a fifth of the world, 900 million people online, and that's growing roughly 30 million people every 6 months. So just a tremendous size to the audience, and obviously rapidly growing. The next component to that is just the sheer size of the economy. Obviously, second largest economy in the world, but it is actually the largest by purchasing power parity, which is basically an economic indicator for everyone that's an economic junkie like me and knows about the Big Mac index. That's something where you're looking about, if you normalize for currency differences and the basket of goods that you could purchase based on the income and the power of purchasing that you would have in one region, how does that apply to a different region? So China has actually overtaken as the leader. So the point to take away from there is there's a huge amount of spending power that exists within China. And a lot of that, to speak to that last point around the rapid urbanization of tier 1, 2, new tier 1 cities, tier 3 cities, the consumption of Western goods is only growing. And there's obviously a massive demand. Marketers are finding ways to basically reach consumers and make sure that their brand is known and that their purchases are happening on those native platforms the Chinese audiences are leveraging. The next point, as far as digital ad spend, so $75 billion in 2020 digital ad spend, which is second only to the US in terms of total spend. It's set to double over the next 5 years. So this is very much a market that is accelerating within digital, and programmatic actually making up a majority of that spend. Last year, it was about 34 billion spent in programmatic. So sort of the theme to take away from this is just an immense population, huge amount of purchasing power, continuing to accelerate and grow, massive demand for Western brands, and something where programmatic in general is accelerating within digital, which is the overwhelming majority of ad spend within China. Again, very much a mobile first and digital savvy audience. Take a look first at the middle class. So over 400 million people, the largest of any country and the highest amount of any country the world has ever seen. This speaks to that second point around disposable income and the level of affluence that exists within China. So a lot of the brands that we've worked with, whether they be luxury brands, more high-end, going after audiences with a high household income, high disposable income. China is very much a market where if you're looking to reach an audience for the purpose of selling luxury goods or high-end travel or anything that's related to basically people's disposable income being spent, it's continuing to grow. You can see an increase from just 8% in 2010 to a decade later, 50% of the population with that disposable income. So again, just a huge amount of purchasing power and only growing. To speak to the point on mobile, so of that 900 million people that are online, 99% access the internet through their mobile phone. So again, very much mobile first. It's something where we do run campaigns where we'll marry in desktop inventory, but the primary delivery source is going to be mobile. Within that, mostly native display video. But it's something where you're definitely going to want to consider a mobile first approach, which for different marketers, they will need to adjust creatives and will need to adjust all the things that relate to measurement when we start to tackle China as a new market. Consumer time spent online over 3 hours on the mobile phone each day. I'm sure some of you are probably auditing yourselves to think whether you're above or below that number. Potentially all of us above that number right now, but hopefully back to normal at some point. But again, a huge amount of time spent on mobile devices. Consumption of content online is huge. And over 50% of global transactions occur in China. So when we start to speak about some of the biggest platforms that are facilitating these transactions, Taobao, Tmall, JD, Redbook, these massive players within that ecosystem, it's trillions of dollars being spent just within retail sales. And obviously, the growth of e-commerce and just global online transactions is huge, with China absolutely leading the way. So many of you may be thinking, if you've already sort of delved into China and already executing campaigns there, maybe it's on the roadmap and something that's been accelerated with this last year that you want to be able to do more with in this coming year. Why reach China from outside of China? And so we sent out to do a survey to try and understand what are global marketers thinking as far as their approach to China, what's important to them, what's causing them apprehension or keeping them up at night as far as maybe the lack of familiarity with that market, or just not necessarily diving in as much as they might want to. And a few things jumped out, which I thought we would share, mainly for the point of it might be empathetic. Some of you are feeling this way too, but also to understand that this is very much how we built our solution. So as you look to different partners that you'd be leveraging to reach China, start to consider if some of these things are points that you're feeling, and then also boxes that are checked as far as those needs being satisfied with the partner that you're working with. So over 60% had cited local market knowledge is critical when executing in China. That's something that if you're thinking about working with a local partner, there can be challenges with time differences, maybe a lack of familiarity with not having worked with them before. But you need to have that local market expertise. It's not necessarily something where you can airlift your existing strategy and look to deploy that in China. So you're going to want to have that local market expertise. We did find that less than 20% of global brands were making their marketing decisions locally in China. So you're talking about the overwhelming majority of folks that are marketing from North America are making decisions about China from home. It usually falls down to the point where they get to activation and they say, well, we're not really sure how to, trade on IPINU, or how do we leverage Miaozhen for measurement? And there's all these things that if you don't have that local expertise and that familiarity, with those platforms, it can be very challenging. But you're very much not alone if you're making decisions about China from North America or from other regions in the world. We've seen that that's been an overwhelming majority of the clients that we've spoken to and surveyed. 50% or more than 50% want a trusted partner with a reputation for delivering success. Trust is huge in this industry. It's something where you absolutely need to earn it and keep it and show that you can consistently deliver and show that you can be a trusted partner. When you're working with new partners, especially in unfamiliar regions where there can be challenges with fraud, there can be challenges with maybe major players that have minimum spend requirements that can make certain marketers uncomfortable. It's the kind of thing where trust needs to be absolutely paramount. And I think that that's been a huge factor for our success there, as we've been able to, over the past decade or more, prove ourselves as programmatic experts. And then when it comes to China, having that reputation and being able to apply that local market expertise has been really meaningful for our partners. Joe pointed out it's a journey. I mean, there's going to be hurdles. There's going to be learning required. That's another point why I think working with a loyal and trusted partner is meaningful. You're always going to get over the hurdles better and take on that adversity or those challenges better when you trust that you both want the same thing, which is ultimately to make your client successful. So just another point to consider as far as a major factor that's meaningful. And then that last point around partners who have local Chinese platform capabilities, that took us the better part of 24 to 32 months to actually create. And developing those partnerships, being able to really create what is a best-in-class approach to programmatic within China. That's not an easy thing to do. And so much like all the partnerships that we all cultivate locally, to go on that journey and do that in China is obviously very difficult, and something that we've undertaken, and we feel that a lot of marketers can benefit from some of what we've built. So let's take a look at some of the opportunity in China as far as what is the growth of programmatic, who are some of these main players, start to understand some of the differences in that market. And there's a lot to cover there. So I'll try and go through it conscious of time. So first, we mentioned that digital ad spend does make up 75% of total ad spend. So that's the highest share of any comparable mature market, which you can see on that graph on the right. Programmatic ad spend has doubled over the past 2 years. And again, it's forecast to grow by another 50% over the next year. So just the rapid acceleration of programmatic, the fact that publishers and platforms that can monetize that, they're seeing a lot of benefit, and they're sort of leaning in more than maybe they did 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And then advertisers, the demand is there. So it's something that it's very much this perfect storm of the platforms are wanting to maximize their yield and monetization, and the demand is there and wanting to reach that audience that's incredibly active with that purchasing power. So again, just kind of the perfect storm as far as those two things coming together. So an interesting stat here, 90% of programmatic ad spend is across mobile. 95% of that total programmatic avails are in mobile apps. I'll dig into a few more stats here, which we can include in the follow-up, but 87% of that being mobile. Then you have 62% of that is display, with search and social then following. 75% of that display is within programmatic, and then 99% of that is within app. So without trying to make sense of all those stats and statistics, the theme is basically very much mobile first, and very much something where programmatic is accelerating. And so that's just something you want to keep in mind. We're not going to focus this presentation today too much on search and social. It's more meant to look at how can you gain the efficiencies and transparencies and leverage all the benefits of programmatic. But it is worth considering that programmatic is growing the fastest. Doesn't mean that search and social shouldn't be a component of what you're doing. It absolutely should. And we'll get into that a little bit. I'll touch on some of the main players and some of the things you can do there. But if you look at the pace of growth, it's very much programmatic, and it's for those 2 points that we mentioned, as far as publishers wanting to sort of improve yield monetization, and then obviously the demand being there on the brand and advertiser side. So some of the main players, folks on the call today may be familiar with some of these main ones, with Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. If you're not, we'll walk through them briefly and just try to create some familiarity, so it seems a little bit less foreign. But Baidu, you can sort of compare them to Google. They are the primary search service within China. They also own a number of subsidiaries, say like iQIYI, which is sort of referred to as the Netflix of China, massive streaming service. Over 70% of the search queries are happening on Baidu. So this is very much a platform that we see a lot of marketers leveraging to the fullest extent they can to gather activity within search. Something else interesting that we'll call out here as far as Baidu and how you're able to leverage them is you can take your Baidu keywords and everything that you're using to leverage in your search campaigns, and you can apply that to programmatic campaigns and layer it in as part of your targeting. So a lot of what we've started to do is marry some of our programmatic display campaigns with a Baidu search campaign. And that's been really effective, both in the sense of just leveraging the existing assets that partners have, keyword lists and whatnot, but also just the air cover that those two campaigns can provide for each other, running search and programmatic at the same time. So that's a brief introduction on Baidu. Obviously, they have massive other parts of their business as well, but if you need to take anything away from them, just remember they're just like a Google, but in China. Alibaba would be most like Amazon. So the primary service is going to be e-commerce and payments. They own some of the biggest e-com platforms like Tmall and Taobao. One of the most interesting stats coming out most recently was around Singles Day, which was back in November, generated over 14 billion in sales within the first hour, which is just a staggering number. And 90% of those purchases were coming from mobile devices. So again, just kind of validating that idea of you're going to want to be in mobile. You're going to want to make sure that you're speaking to consumers in the platforms that are native to them with the payment systems that they're using, and just making things, facilitating things for consumers the way that they like to operate and behave. So Alibaba does some pretty incredible things too. We partner with them for the purpose of being able to measure things like awareness, interest, purchase loyalty, intent, all these things within sort of what would be considered like a closed walled environment, a closed garden environment in, say their Tmall store. You can do some pretty interesting things with measurement to determine the efficacy of the ads that you're running. And I think that's where programmatic, especially within some of these larger platforms where you can leverage their data and you can access their inventory, becomes really interesting. The trick then is just measuring the efficacy and determining that your return on ad spend is there. Tencent, to run through them quickly, obviously, again, a massive business across social, gaming, payments, venture capital. I mean, they do a lot of things. But most like Facebook, if you were to compare the platform you're probably all most familiar with, which is Wechat, over 1 billion monthly active users. And again, their app environment, it's estimated they reach over 90% of the Chinese internet population. So massive reach, a huge player in the space, and some pretty interesting things you can do both from tapping into the inventory from these players, leveraging the data from these players, and being able to drive that all back to measurement components so you can understand that the dollars that you're spending are being effective and that you're driving business outcomes for your brands and for your clients. So to go into a few more, and this is where we start to look at programmatic and some of the other players. Another one you're probably familiar with is ByteDance. More of an entertainment side of things, if you think about Douyin and TikTok and the value that brings to consumers, but they also have other business like Tuxiao, which is more of a news component. So again, just another major player. JD.com, huge e-com player. One that I think is probably, if you take Taobao, Tmall, and JD, those are three of the biggest. So definitely one that if you're selling retail goods online, you'll want to have a strategy to be able to tap into JD. Some of the other major players that we've partnered with that when you get into programmatic, you can start to leverage. The first point would be IPINU and points of access. So that's a leading DSP within China. The two main ones are basically IPINU and Youyi as far as the leading DSPs within China. They both have their strengths, sort of similar to how you might leverage a DV360 versus a Xandr versus a Trade Desk for an Amazon. They all have their strengths. So you want to sort of understand based on the objective that you have and even the creative formats that you're leveraging, who would you want to work with? But you can sort of consider IPINU, that's your point of access, your DSP. Talking Data, leading Chinese DMP. What's interesting about them is they're an aggregator of some of the largest hero app data sets within the world, within China and just by nature of the size within the world. And you can do some really interesting things with the granularity of the data that you can apply from leveraging Talking Data and pushing that into the DSP. So the taxonomies that you can create, some of the flexibility you have to build your own audiences. I think what's been most interesting for me coming from, selling for the better part of like 12 or 14 years, within North America and globally, and then getting into China within the last few years, it was the idea of how much you can do with data and the idea that you don't need to be reliant on necessarily taking off-the-shelf third-party segments and then just deploying them within a DSP. You can be extremely granular and effective with the data targeting that you deploy within China. And obviously, it's hugely important when you start to think about 900 million people online. You need to make sure that you're honing in on the right audience. RTB Asia, we'll call out them as a partner that is really quality control. So the most prominent ad verification partner. They are MRC accredited, so that's good that it brings some familiarity when marketers are looking for, hey, I want that independent verification. I want to be able to trust that this partner is grading their own homework and that there is, validity to the reporting that I'm seeing. So our RTB Asia, you can almost liken them to the IAS or Double Verify or Oracle Moat of China, and they're very much that quality control partner. So to kind of speak to a little bit of our approach and some of the things you might want to consider as you're building your own approach within China. Again, that first piece, your point of access. So iPinyu and Yoyi, leading DSPs for access within China. Talking Data, that main data aggregator that sees some of the data from the largest hero apps within China. LiveRamp is very much active in China. We've done some pretty interesting things to be able to onboard first-party data for the purpose of reaching, say, certain like loyalty card consumers within China, or being able to just, in essence, take that first-party data that the advertiser has and leverage it within China. The interesting part about that is it's basically all on a device ID basis. It's not something that's cookie-based, so you start to become like very deterministic with the user that you're reaching. And there's a lot of interesting things you can do once you bring first-party data into the mix in general. But in China, it's sort of it accelerates even more some of the things you can do when you have that data available. RTB Asia we spoke about for quality control, and then Miaozhen systems. I'll briefly mention that Miaozhen you can almost liken to the Google Analytics of China. The way that we're leveraging them is we'll place a Miaozhen pixel, and that will allow us to understand certain site quality metrics for the visitors, bounce rate, duration, session depth, all of those things that help us understand when we reach the right audience, when that audience comes through to your page. Are they of quality? Are they taking action on the site? Are they in fact someone who's interested in your offering? So Miaozhen systems, again, liken them to a Google Analytics, and they're an especially meaningful partner when you get into measurement. Some of the inventory partners we mentioned, so Youku, who's owned by Alibaba, you can almost consider them the YouTube of China. iQIYI, again, like the Netflix of China, obviously huge streaming service and a massive reach across there. One thing to consider within the inventory piece when you start to deploy programmatic is there's really no standardization of creative sizes. And so it's kind of limitless as far as what you would do in developing your creative assets and then getting reach to all those different publishers. And so what we've done and what you'll want to make sure that you're doing is definitely liaise with your partner to understand that based on the creative assets that you're using and whether they're fully translated, if it's video, if it's dubbed over in Mandarin, all these things that are sort of nuanced to the variable for success in running a campaign, which is going to be your creative. Once you've deployed the right targeting and once you have the right partners in place, that creative piece is something where to get delivery across many of these different inventory partners, it's very specific. So without that standardization that you see that exists here within the IAB, it's very nuanced. So you want a partner that's going to help you with that, resizing assets, helping with translation, doing all those things that, again, are very tactical, but very meaningful when you think about you want to be able to open up and access the best, most premium inventory within that region. So whether it be Weibo or Youku or iQIYI, these are where you want to look to your partners for expertise and say, hey, how do I reach the most premium inventory within these different businesses? And then some of the data sources that we're seeing data coming through from, whether that be Wechat and you get tremendously rich demographic info, or again, if it's Baidu search and you're understanding search intent, there's a lot of really interesting things, again, that you can do with data. And you're not necessarily just subject to, again, running third-party segments or sort of just, I guess, relying on what exists within the DSP. You can do a lot to create your own audience taxonomy. And that's been especially effective. I'll get into some of the verticals where we've seen strength, but as everyone can imagine, around this time last year, some of our biggest clients existed within travel and education. Just pragmatically, a huge amount of international students that are coming from China and enrolling in US and Canadian universities. A huge amount of travel that comes from China, people that are coming on vacation and spending money and traveling around the US and all of North America. That pretty much went away right around this time last year. And what we saw that was so interesting was that B2B really emerged as a huge source of demand within our business. And so that was an area where we had been focused, but it absolutely accelerated throughout this past year. And so a lot of B2B marketers, the interest in China came from the fact that a lot of their domestic demand had slowed just with the nature of what was going on. And so they had sort of accelerated their approach to be able to reach China in the sense that Chinese demand was still active, mills, manufacturers, brands and retailers, factories were still running. So it was something where a lot of B2B marketers started to dial up their efforts. And so I bring that up around the data sources piece, because when you start to try and hone in on B2B audiences, that's where leveraging data becomes increasingly more important, because you can't always cast as wide of a net as if you were selling, maybe consumer goods or, something within retail. So just something to keep in mind as far as like a quick anecdote on the application of some of the things you can do with targeting. And even if you do have a very specific audience, like within B2B, and you want to reach software or building materials or manufacturing, commodities, I mean, these are areas where we've had a lot of success, and it's been really interesting for me to see, and just fascinating, the things that we can do with data and then the results that we're able to drive. Another piece that I will call out here, which we'll get into later, is that fraud is an issue within China. It's something where you're going to want to tackle that head on. We've built technology, again, through RTB Asia, which allows us to do that. But you're going to want to make sure that you're working with a partner that has that ability. We've seen fraud rates that exist within China between 25 to 35% through the pre-bid technology that we've built with RTB Asia and everything that factors into that technology. We've been able to get that down to roughly 2 or 3%. And then we go a step further. We don't even invoice or bill our clients for anything to do with fraudulent traffic. It's simply something where we'll start to learn. We'll start to understand which publishers we want to be tapping into. We'll get smarter together, but we never pass on that risk to any of our partners. So I would say definitely look for a partner who's willing to learn with you, who's not necessarily going to make you pay for those learnings, but rather is going to help you get to that level of expertise and at least mitigate some of the risk along that journey. We'll go through this end part here just for the last 10 minutes to get into some tips for success. Again, this is the text-heavy piece, so this might be something that is a leave behind, will be helpful for later, but hopefully it'll be something we can go through and will be fascinating for everyone on the line. But the idea of going local, so it's very much going to China is something where you're going to want to make sure you have your strategy in line to cater to that audience, rather than sort of expecting those platforms and partners and that region to bend for you. And so embracing those nuances within local programmatic technology, again, thinking about partners like Yogi and iPinyu and Miaozhen and all these partners that allow you to access that local expertise and those platform capabilities, but still be able to operate it from home. And that's what's so excellent about programmatic, is you can gain those local expertise and efficiencies, but you don't necessarily need to be present in that market. So we definitely are proponents of work along the native Chinese tech, have that domestic Chinese tech stack, but you don't necessarily need to be in that region. And there is value to working with a global partner that has that expertise, but can also, if it's 6 o'clock on a Friday and you need tags trafficked, someone's going to pick up the phone. So, and that's probably just one example. I think I've gotten a few phone calls on 6 o'clock, which were more intense than that. But it's the idea of the time zone does become a factor. The translation piece does become a factor. The differences with platforms and trying to sync up reporting and attribution, it all gets a little bit murky at times. So you want that partner that's going to be able to help you through that. The mobile component, we talked about that a bit. The idea that you're going to want to think mobile first, in-app environments, think about your reach and considering SDK coverage to be able to leverage device IDs. The mobile component is definitely something you'll want to consider for your creative, for your targeting, for your measurement. It is across the board something that is absolutely at the forefront of all of the strategic conversations we have. We do some interesting things to be able to stitch together activation on desktop and mobile to be able to prove out the efficacy of mobile. And we've seen that to be hugely valuable amongst clients that are some of the most sophisticated in the world. Clients that I would have thought they had a solution for this, but sort of came to us and said, hey, can you help us figure this out? So the mobile component is actually absolutely one where having expertise and having chops and having executed it before within China is something that's going to be tremendous valuable to just sort of rounding off that learning curve. The targeting piece we spoke about, the granularity that you can get into. some of the things you can do to construct your own taxonomy. Again, the nuances of reaching B2B audiences, or if you're going after students for the purpose of enrollment, if you're selling products through e-commerce and retail, especially if it's luxury. Targeting is something where all of the granular data that comes in from Talking Data and from Baidu and from LiveRamp that we see, we've been able to stitch together some really interesting things. One that jumps to mind was a loyalty card program where we were taking all of the first-party data that exists within the loyalty card program for this this hotel group, and then being able to factor that in with a higher household income audience and someone that would have the propensity to stay at maybe a higher end resort, and then especially going after different geos in, say, the tier 1 and new tier 1 cities. That's another kind of fun thing, fun fact to take away from this is that geo is absolutely the leading factor when you get into targeting within China. So you've got, say, some of the tier 1 cities like Beijing, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai. Those are your main tier 1 cities, right? Then you get into some of the new tier 1 cities like Chengdu, Wuhan, Nanjing. These are some of the cities that, again, like 26, 21, 13 million people as populations. It's a huge amount of people that exist within these cities. And you'll see that in the western parts and the more rural areas of the country, you're not necessarily going to be targeting them in the same way that if you're targeting around the US, everything's very spread out. Or if you're in Canada, everything's somewhat more concentrated around major cities. But within China, it's absolutely at the forefront where geo is going to be the first layer of your targeting, knowing that going after those tier 1, new tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 cities is absolutely going to be paramount to having an effective targeting plan. And just something that obviously is a little bit different than if you're marketing primarily within North America and in the US. Ad fraud we spoke about as an issue. Biggest suggestion here is find a partner who's willing to go on that journey with you and not make it your issue. Someone who can mitigate that risk, who has technology to help to limit the fraud, who has the ability to understand the fraud and remove those publishers. It's obviously an issue and it's something you don't want to waste dollars in being inefficient on fraud. And I think that has probably been, to go back to the survey point before, that's been a point of apprehension for a lot of marketers, is the fact that they know that fraud is an issue within China, and programmatic is obviously one where they want to make sure that they're being efficient with their dollars. So just keep that in mind as something where you're going to want to leverage domestic technology, have a partner that's going to help you mitigate risk, and don't waste your dollars on fraud. I don't think any of us as marketers want to do that. The creative piece and what you'll need to adapt. So native is one of the leading formats within China. We've obviously expanded. We do a lot within connected TV, within video, digital out of home, being able to leverage display and native. It's something where, adapting the creative both to the point of obviously translation, but even to the point where the creative sizing and making sure that you are getting delivery across many of those different publishers and inventory sources. Making sure that things like, if it is video, the dubbing and subtitling is all done correctly, and that you're passing the audits across all of the major video exchanges, which can be very scrutinous. We've seen that's definitely a sticking point, is that, just to call out one interesting thing within creative, the video exchanges audit the creatives, I would say, at an exponential rate, multiple higher than maybe some of the display exchanges. So that's something, if you're running video campaigns, you really want to make sure that your creative is up to snuff and is something that's going to pass those creative audits. So just something to keep in mind as you sort of think about the channels and the formats, and then how your creative will feed into that. And then the last thing is just to expect more and get more. So transparency is the name of the game. Within programmatic, those are things that we demand. We want to understand transparency, what data is working, help me understand the business results that you're driving. Understanding media metrics is so exciting, but you ultimately want to know that you're driving sales and bookings and all these things that are affecting the bottom line of your business. So I think you can absolutely demand more as far as independent verification, transparency around things like reporting what data is being used and what's being effective. All those things that are going to really give you confidence that the partner is doing all those things to optimize the campaign and make the most of your investment. So I think that sort of speaks to the idea of working with a trusted partner and someone that's local. That level of transparency and trust and independent verification, it's really meaningful, because it's obviously a market that is nuanced and at times unfamiliar. So you want to make sure that the partner you're working with is on that journey with you. To sum up a few points on the benefit of programmatic, and then we'll wrap up just in a few minutes and get into questions. I'm sorry if there's questions in the chat right now. We figured we'd do it in the end just because I can only see the presentation. So we'll get into those in just a moment. But the reach point, as far as leveraging programmatic, instant access from home, remove those barriers to entry. One point we'll make about that with the barriers to entry is you'll see that if you're a brand that's maybe not active in China yet, and maybe you're looking to move into that market, there are barriers to entry that exist around documentation, ICP license, Chinese business license, all these things that are prerequisites to passing the audit on these exchanges and being able to run your campaign. So those are things that you're going to want someone to help advise you on and sort of to get through those barriers to entry. Now, as to say is, if you're a very established brand and you already have plenty of operations in China, and that's the story for, I would say, 85% of the clients we work with, they're already in China and they're already doing a lot of things, to operate within China. Barriers to entry still exist, and sometimes those barriers are, again, more practical around, translation and time difference and things like that obviously stand out. But some of them can be just around, minimum spends and the idea of making huge commitments to some of the major players who are potentially going to grade their own homework, and it starts to feel a little bit uncomfortable. So those barriers to entry don't just exist in the form of access or in, getting your brand into China, through the logistics of licenses and ICPs. It's the idea of the barriers that exist around, potentially, feeling comfortable with the investment that you're making and being able to test and learn. You don't want to just put all your eggs in one basket and then, sort of rely on that partner to report back to you. So the efficiency piece, obviously we spoke to, programmatic has been incredibly resilient throughout this past year. So we've seen a lot more budget shift into programmatic, with the ability to customize the targeting to your needs, with the ability to, on the third point, to measure and understand quantifiable results. That's probably been the biggest request that we've gotten from marketers, whether it is a B2B marketer that's driving leads and they just want to understand that they're qualified leads that they can get through and nurture and ultimately turn into customers, all the way through to our e-com clients who are looking at return on ad spend for the goods that they're selling on a monthly basis. So the measurability piece and the efficiency piece sort of go hand in hand, that you want to make sure you're being cost efficient and that you're understanding exactly what you're getting for your dollar. And then the last point on ease. So the idea of the optionality existing now that you can plan and manage programmatic campaigns within China from anywhere in the world is relatively new. That's something where that optionality hasn't existed for a long period of time, and especially the sophistication with which we feel that we're doing it. Obviously, taking that lens of having tremendous amounts of domain expertise within programmatic and then applying that to China. So that's something where if you're a marketer that's located in San Francisco and you're having conversations with global counterparts and you're trying to think about with your local teams how you can best marry your local and global strategies together, the idea of, with ease, being able to reach programmatic from home, that optionality has been something that's gotten a lot of our partners very excited. So I'm sure, as you can tell, as I'm pretty excited. MiQ, we're huge advocates for the huge opportunities that exist and the benefits of programmatic that programmatic provides within China. The other exciting part about that is we've seen that our US marketers and agencies are increasingly getting more excited about reaching China. And again, that's just been accelerated this past year. So that's something where it's always nice to be early, but it's nice that when you're early and things start to catch up, it kind of validates your hypothesis. So that's been especially nice for us to kind of see that a lot of other folks, to go along with that survey that we put out, are starting to do more and accelerate their ambitions within China. With programmatic, again, the audience in China is closer than ever before. So my advice there is just to make sure that if you do have interest and you want to get into the nuances and details, find a partner who's going to take you through that. Again, it is a journey, so it's something that you want to be able to have someone you can trust that's going to get you those answers. And then the last point around the Chinese market just remaining resilient. So again, some of the verticals where we've seen success, definitely around, say, like, May, June of last year, things started to come back online a lot faster. And so programmatic became something that folks were investing in more because of the efficiencies it brought. China as a source of demand was considering continuing to gain pace. So it's something that we believe that market is very resilient. It's a growing market. It continues to grow at pace. So it's something, if you're already paying attention to, hats off to you, and please continue to do so. And we're happy to be, a partner with you to help you do that. And if it's something that you're thinking about doing more or considering or getting more involved in, you're absolutely on the right track, and we more than welcome conversations around that and any questions you have. So with that, we will transition into the Q&A. I think we just have about maybe 10 minutes left. So maybe Joe and team, if you want to facilitate the Q&A, I'm just going to take off screen sharing. I just want to make sure I can see the questions, because right now I'm just seeing the presentation.
Yeah, of course. First of all, thanks for running through that, Brian. I think some of the stats that you just referenced are just crazy and pose such a huge opportunity for brands all over the country to capitalize on. And the growth is just so exciting. I can talk from experience, just learning over the last few years on the nuances is so important to be able to capitalize on it. Right, we've got a couple of questions here. So the first one is, what should you do if your website is located in the US and not hosted in China? This affects load time and performance correct. Do you have any solutions for that? Mobile load time can especially be long.
Yeah, so that's a reality. And I think the campaigns that we run, it is a mix. Sometimes the site will be hosted in the US. More times than not, it is a .cn and it's hosted within China. So my thought there would be, see if it's possible to set up a Chinese website and get that ICP license and have the website hosted in China, because overcoming those lag times and some of the hurdles that you're going to encounter with having the site hosted in the US, it's just going to be something that has material impact. So there's no silver bullet workarounds. We've done some things to help mitigate that lag time, and we've provided some guidance to help our client partners get through that. Sometimes it's even doing the screen share and going in through the code and working it out to the point where it feels very manual, but obviously, if you can help, drive results, we're happy to do it. So I think the short answer there was it's going to be an impact. If it is a US hosted site, you're going to run into load times or lag times rather. And if you can apply for the ICP license and get that set up with the .cn, that will be absolutely huge for keeping the speed as high as possible.
Awesome, thanks. There was a topic you talked on in there. I think this relates to it. Some of the verticals that have really lent into China as an opportunity, and I know education is one of them. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I found this personally fascinating, and I think for the San Francisco market it is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So education is a massive vertical that we work in, and a lot of the universities that we're working with as partners, students coming from abroad, from China, make up a significant portion of their international student enrollment. So it's very much a market that they want to speak to. Oftentimes they have recruitment centers and people who are active in China locally who are helping to gain that following amongst students and would-be enrollers at US universities. We very much saw that there was challenges happening right around this time last year, to the point where travel was halted, and there was issues with visas and embassies approving visas. And so we saw that there was almost a switch that went off within education and travel. Both kind of went hand in hand as far as the activity slowing down last year. And then that sort of went on to the point where then education, universities started to focus more on their online programs. And so different universities that might be hosting their curriculums within Coursera or other online platforms, we're starting to push that more, to the point where they could still sort of engage with that international student body, but not necessarily have to do it through the residential programs, where folks would have to come here and live in the dorms and do all those things that college students love to do. So we definitely saw a shift in a focus to online programs. But then where that starts to become challenging is with platforms like Coursera that host online curriculums. Those aren't accessible. Coursera is not accessible within China. So you have students, some of whom are savvy, who are leveraging a VPN to gain access to that online curriculum. You have some other workarounds that folks are using, but it's basically that idea of, if you're a university, how do you balance that approach for online and residential programs? How do you overcome the hurdles that exist within online, especially if your curriculum is hosted within a platform that has limitations within China? And then on the residential side, how do you sort of pay attention to those dynamic news events that are coming out every day, which are, allowing people to travel and allow students to sort of get back to learning the way that they used to? So there was an announcement that came out just recently where F1 visas are starting to be approved again, to the point where students can start to come over and enroll in universities in a way that looks more like it used to. So I think you're seeing progress there. I guess the long-winded answer is definitely a focus with online programs, but within residential, we're starting to see progress there. The embassies are starting to process visas faster, and that ability to open up to some of the existing F1 visas was huge, because that's allowing people to sort of, get back to learning the way that they're used to.
Awesome. I suppose if we take a step back, I've got a question here to ask you to list some specific brands that you work with. I don't know if you're going to be able to do that, but whether it's that or talking about some of the categories that have kind of reactivated earlier on post-pandemic, I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. They've given us the okay to talk about it, so we can share a few. So Microsoft, we work with heavily. They basically, there's lots of issues with software piracy within China. And when you get into marketing software for business or for students, if it's something like Office 365, there's obviously macro issues that exist with piracy, but then there's also the point where when you get into measurement and you want to understand how are you driving licenses, how are you getting people to purchase that software, if you're doing it in a mobile in-app environment, how do you then attribute that back to a desktop conversion? And so that was the example I spoke to before about how we've been able to stitch together some activation within desktop and some activation within mobile. And through our reporting and through what we've created within the DSPs and the client reporting that we see, we're able to understand the efficacy of the campaigns and report back on return on ad spend metrics that no one else in China is doing. And so that's something where, again, like you take, Microsoft, $1.7 trillion business, obviously, selling a product like software, which has issues with piracy in China. And we've been able to come up with solutions that allow not only highly targeted and sophisticated programmatic campaigns to reach the right audiences, but real validity in the measurements and in the way we're able to circumvent some of the issues like fraud and piracy and some of those things that are just material to the business. So that's one within software. Another one I'll mention, Otis Elevators. So highly active within China. Fun fact of the day, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, over a quarter of the world's escalators and elevators exist within China. Sort of speaks to the massive development that's happened, especially in these tier 1 and new tier 1 cities. So with that, much like if you purchase a Lexus wants to make sure that you come back to the dealership to have your tires rotated and your oil changed. So it's the same thing with building equipment and with elevators. So Otis has very much looked to us for multiple campaigns, whether it be this time around last year around cleanliness and COVID campaigns, which can give people confidence about getting into building settings and elevators again to the point where they feel safe. Some of it has had to do with new equipment and design to be able to reach architects and people who would be making decisions about sourcing that building equipment and basically bringing in new equipment vendors. And then the third component would be servicing. So back to the Lexus example, if you buy an Otis elevator, they want to make sure you're getting it serviced by a licensed Otis technician. So that's one where we've seen just many facets to the campaign, obviously different targeting parameters. If you consider, someone making decisions about, building equipment versus servicing versus, design and architecture. So just kind of an interesting B2B example, which I've had a lot of fun working on this last year. I've learned so much about elevators that I didn't know before. So that's been exciting. And the list goes on. I think MedTech has been an extremely strong category for us. Everything from CROs, which are clinical research organizations, to different companies that are actually, manufacturing products for healthcare providers and hospitals. Financial services, we've seen a lot of demand, marketers that want to go after high net worth individuals, financial advisors, money managers, introducing brokers within China, folks who are basically going to be making decisions about capital and investments that would be happening in US businesses. Travel has started to come back online. That's one where we had a tremendous amount of success initially, and then obviously with things happening last year, it slowed down. But that is starting to come back online now. One thing that's been interesting there is domestic travel is through the roof in China. So what a lot of our partners have done to speak to that loyalty program provider, they've started to look at, hey, we're very saturated within North America, and we're doing a lot within, say, Canada and the US. How do we start to reach an incremental audience within China, and how do we start to tap into them, especially because they're very active traveling now, whereas our domestic travelers are staying at home for the most part. This was months ago. So that was one where just sort of looking at China as like incremental demand and a region that you can start to say, okay, how can I add to the audience that I'm reaching in a way where you almost hedge against, no matter what happens in the world, you've got programs active and you're able to sort of drive results for your brands and your marketing partners in a way where if you had all your eggs in one basket, or domestic travel slows in one region, it can be difficult to navigate that. So that's just to name a few. I would say commodities, trade associations, trade bodies, they've been extremely active. Manufacturing, building materials, equipment, motion and control technologies firms. I mean, the list goes on. Like I said, like B2B this last year has been incredibly active. And so that's one, if there's anyone on the line right now who's a B2B marketer, feel free to send me an email after, and we'll have a good chat about what options might be out there. And I know I'm running over on time. So is there any other questions that we should jump into, or did you want to wrap us up, Joe?
No, I'm going to wrap us up. So Brian, thank you so much for running through that. Just as a reminder to everyone else, this content's going to be made available on the SF Big site. And then we can also share the deck around to members that want it. So please reach out. We're looking forward to announcing what our next event will be in the next couple of months, and just keep an eye out for the updates that do launch on the SF Big site, specifically around the new Unlock. And we look forward to hearing from you. Any sessions that you want covered would be awesome too. I hope you all have a fantastic day. Brian, thank you again. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone at SF Big. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.